The Buffalo Roll. Her psychiatrist, a romance, and a lawsuit.
You knew that such a relationship would be harmful to her. But there's a real high risk of that.
He was already my doctor in helping me, and if he became my lover as well, he would be my doctor and he would be my lover.
My Doctor, My Lover, on Frontline.
Tuesday night at 9, here on OPB.
Funding for the MacNeil Lehrer NewsHour is provided by the professional contractors of NECA and union craftspeople of IBEW Local 48, providing vision for the future.
Good evening. I'm Robert MacNeil in New York.
And I'm Jim Lehrer in Washington. After our summary of the news this Friday, we have a full debate about President Clinton's proposal for campaign financing reform, with White House Chief of Staff Mac McClarty, Senator Mitch McConnell, and two reform advocates. Then come the weekly analysis of David Gergen and Mark Shields, plus thoughts on reorganizing the Clinton White House from Elizabeth Drew and Jody Powell.
Part of helping the world live and communicate better is keeping it well informed. That's why funding for the MacNeil Lehrer NewsHour is provided by AT&T and by PepsiCo. And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and viewers like you.
President Clinton said today the U.S. and its allies need to turn up the heat on Bosnia's Serbs. He said he welcomed the decision by Yugoslavia's Serb-led government to cut off supplies to Serbs in Bosnia, but only if they followed through on it. Mr. Clinton said he would meet with his national security advisors and members of Congress over the weekend to analyze the situation and the views of U.S. allies. At a news conference this afternoon with the President of the European Community and the Prime Minister of Denmark, he talked about possible military action.
If I decide to ask the American people and the United States Congress to support an approach that would include the use of air power, I would have a very specific, clearly defined strategy to pursue and very clear tactical objectives for the use of that air power, which would have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and which not only I, but our military advisors had advised me could be achieved.
The President said that overall the allies were close to agreement on specific tactical steps for actions against Bosnian Serbs. Secretary of State Christopher wrapped up his mission aimed at winning European support for that action. We have a report narrated by Vera Frankel of Worldwide Television News.
Rome was the last of the 5 European capitals visited by Christopher. He received only lukewarm support elsewhere for American plans to arm the Bosnians and mount air attacks against the Bosnian Serbs. Italy's Prime Minister Carlo Ciampi was more receptive to American plans to force peace in Bosnia.
I think we're determined to develop a common policy here. It is a common policy that seeks to strengthen the actions to be taken against Serbia and to try to find ways to respond to the aggression and the bloodshed and other terrible acts that have taken place in Bosnia.
The Italian Foreign Minister, Beniamino Andreatta, told Christopher that Italy was willing to consider airstrikes against the Bosnian Serbs and arming the Muslims, the most positive European response so far. Hectic diplomacy was also underway in Belgrade. Serbian President Slobodan Milosevic headed for the Russian embassy to meet Russian envoy Vitaly Churkin. Churkin earlier said Serb leaders have agreed to the deployment of Russian troops in Bosnia within a UN peacekeeping force. The deputy speaker of the Bosnian Serb parliament also met Churkin.
He gave the initiative for the safety zones and for the monitors, and will try to implement it as soon as possible.
But such acceptance alone seemed unlikely to fend off Western anger.
Although the Bosnian Serbs said they accepted safe areas, their forces reportedly continued attacks today on one of them, the Muslim enclave of Žepa. It was one of 6 Bosnian areas which the Security Council yesterday declared UN-protected zones. Local radio reports said more than 200 people had been killed in Žepa since Tuesday. The Serbs have blocked UN access to the enclave, making it impossible to independently confirm the scale of the fighting. Jim?
President Clinton today proposed major changes in the way political campaigns are financed. His plan would limit the money Senate and House candidates can receive from political action committees and bar lobbyists from contributing to members of Congress they have lobbied. Other provisions include voluntary spending limits and public funding for advertising. Mr. Clinton spoke about the changes on the White House South grounds.
It's quite clear. Government will work for the middle class and for the average American only if Washington is free to work for the national interests and not narrow interests. And that won't happen unless we change the way we finance campaigns in this country. It's time to curb the role of special interests and to empower average citizens to have their voices heard once again.
We'll have more on campaign finance reform right after this news summary. Former Alabama Governor Guy Hunt received a suspended prison sentence today. Hunt was convicted of taking money from his 1987 inaugural fund for personal use. The judge also ordered him to perform 1,000 hours of community service and pay back the $200,000 he took from the fund. Hunt, a Republican, was removed from office after his conviction on April 22nd. He was replaced by the lieutenant governor, a Democrat.
In economic news, the Labor Department reported the nation's jobless rate remained at 7% in April. It's the third straight month at that level. A department statement said a modest number of new jobs were created last month, but most of them were temporary. The Pentagon today announced the latest list of overseas base closings. 46 additional military sites will close or reduce operations in Europe, South Korea, and Morocco. Since 1990, the Defense Department has proposed reductions at 744 overseas bases to accommodate post-Cold War budget cuts.
A sixth suspect in the World Trade Center bombing was arraigned in New York City today. He is Ahmad Ajaj, a 27-year-old Palestinian. He was charged in federal court with conspiracy to destroy the Trade Center. The February 26th bombing killed 6 people and wounded more than 1,000. 5 other men have been charged in the blast. The precise role of the latest suspect was not spelled out in the indictment.
In South Africa, black and white political groups agreed today to hold multiracial elections within a year. Those elections will put an end to 3 centuries of whites-only rule. A spokesman for the African National Congress called the agreement a monumental step in the political negotiations to allow all races to share power.
And that's it for the news summary tonight. Now it's on to campaign financing reform and to Gergen and Shields and other Friday night analyzers. Campaign finance reform is first tonight, as it has been on other nights through the years. It never goes away because it never happens. President Clinton announced a plan today that he says would finally make it happen, that would finally reduce the influence of special interests and the wealthy in political campaigns. Republicans and other critics dispute the plan and the claims. We will hear that argument right after this backgrounder by Kwame Holman.
4 years ago, it was President George Bush who called for campaign finance reform, and he targeted political action committees.
More than 90% of all PAC contributions come from PACs sponsored by corporations, unions, and trade associations. So the cornerstone of this reform, of our reform, is the elimination of those political action committees.
3 years ago, it was Senator Paul Simon of Illinois who said he had to raise $8 million to run for re-election and apologized for having to do so.
Unfortunately, that's essential in this process that we have. We ought to improve the process of financing campaigns, but in the meantime, I have to use the process that exists.
2 years ago, it was Christine Whitman of New Jersey who said campaign finance reform might have made a difference in her race against incumbent Senator Bill Bradley.
Obviously, anything that would have helped bring television within our capability of achieving by making it affordable would have been helpful.
And last year, it was Tom Hattery of Western Maryland, an unsuccessful challenger for a House seat, who said he had to spend much of his campaign on the phone with potential contributors.
You know, you can't attribute 100% of the time of that phone call to raising money. but it's a large percentage, unfortunately, of time is spent raising money.
For years, there's been near total agreement among Democrats and Republicans, incumbents and challengers, that something has to be done to change the rules of campaign financing. Yet today, after countless campaigns and millions of dollars spent, candidates for Congress still are playing by the same old rules.
If anything, it's just gotten worse. You know, the amount of spending on campaigns just keeps going out of sight. In the last election cycle, the spending was up 52% from the last election. Over $600 million being spent by people to get elected to Congress. It's made us part-time members of Congress and full-time fundraisers, and it's caused the people watching the whole process to sit back and say, does Congress belong to us anymore, or does it belong to the moneyed special interests?
David Boren was first elected to the Senate in 1978 and has spent much of his time since trying to change the rules that got him there.
You know, it was Barry Goldwater who joined with me in the very first proposal we had for campaign finance reform, and from the very beginning, I haven't regarded this as a party matter, but as a matter of national interest. It's something that needs to be done for America, not for one party or another.
But in Congress, the two parties can't even agree on what the problem is, let alone how to fix it. As a result, the campaign finance reform passed by the Democrat-controlled Congress last year was vetoed by the Republican president.
I think everybody's for campaign finance reform. It's the details that where you get the problems.
Vermont's Jim Jeffords was one of 3 Senate Republicans to vote for the Democrats' campaign finance reform last year, but admits that was an easy vote.
This year is for real. Last year it was for fun. Everyone knew that if it was a Democratic campaign reform package, the president's going to veto it, and a veto would be sustained and be all over with. So you could do all sorts of wonderful things. Vote whatever you wanted to. It was a good free vote. This year it's going to count.
Pushing that easy vote was Ross Perot, who campaigned for president last year in part on campaign finance reform and renewed his attack on the status quo this year.
In order for Congress to be able to tend to the business of our country, we must reduce the cost of campaigns and the time for campaigns.
The plan President Clinton proposed this morning and called historic is very similar to the one rejected by President Bush last year.
Without fundamental change in the way we finance campaigns, everything else we seek to improve in the lives of our people, from creating jobs to providing a secure system of health care, to educating our people better and enabling us to compete in a global economy, everything will be harder to achieve.
The president's plan calls for voluntary limits on how much candidates can spend. Mandatory limits have been found unconstitutional. Senate candidates could spend from about $1.2 to $5.5 million, depending on the state's population. Candidates for the House could spend up to $600,000. The president also wants to reduce political action committee contributions to $1,000 to presidential candidates, $2,500 to Senate candidates. The limit for House candidates would remain at $5,000. And the president's plan puts tighter restrictions on so-called soft money, unlimited contributions to political parties that often are back-channeled to candidates. There are incentives in the president's plan. Candidates who agree to the voluntary limits would get broadcast vouchers to buy television time, as well as lower mailing costs. Costs incurred by the plan would be paid for by $5 in public funds for every taxpayer who checks off a box on their income tax return, and by eliminating current tax deductions for lobbying expenses. Making a particular target of lobbyists, the president also proposed banning them from contributing to the campaigns of congressional or presidential candidates they have lobbied or will lobby.
Today, by one estimate, Washington, D.C. has at least 80,000 people working directly or indirectly to lobby the national government, a veritable influence industry. To be sure, these lobbyists often represent points of view that genuinely deserve to be heard, and we in government often benefit from their views. But there are times when these powerful interests turn debate into delay and exert more influence over decisions in Washington than the people we were elected to serve do.
Despite the high hopes this morning for the new president's attempt at campaign finance reform, the Democrat who's been waging the battle the longest, Senator David Boren, gives the plan only a 50-50 chance of passage.
And that brings us to our debate. Mac McClarty is the White House Chief of Staff. Senator Mitch McConnell of Kentucky is co-chair of the Republican Congressional Reform Task Force and a member of the Senate Rules Committee. Fred Wertheimer is the president of Common Cause. Ellen Miller is the executive director of the Center for Responsive Politics. She joins us tonight from New Orleans. Let's go through the main points of the president's program one at a time, if we could. Mr. McClarty, in simple terms, how would this voluntary spending limits thing work? Is it as simple as that appears?
Well, I think, Jim, most Americans want fundamental campaign reform. They want the system to work better, and those that participate in the process want it to work better. And this provides an incentive for candidates that participate in this system to limit the amount that are spent in campaigns, and therefore that's how the voluntary system works, and it is simple to answer your question.
I mean, in each one of these categories of campaigns, a Senate candidate or a House candidate, if he or she agrees, then other things accrue to them in return.
That's right.
Is that right?
It has an incentive.
Now, Senator, do you support this?
Jim, there's nothing voluntary about these spending limits. In fact, they are mandatory. They're like a hammer. If you were so audacious as to want to speak too much, and by the way, it's important for the viewers to know that the Supreme Court does believe spending is speech, and we're talking about First Amendment rights here. If you're so audacious as to speak too much, all kinds of bad things happen to you. First, you lose your broadcast discount. Second, public funds.
You mean spend too much, right?
Speak too much. Spend too much.
Oh, I see. I get
Same
it.
thing.
Okay.
The Supreme Court said spending is speech.
Okay.
If you speak beyond the quantified amount in this bill, bad things befall you. Number one, you lose your broadcast discount. Number two, believe it or not, tax dollars are given to your opponent to counter your excessive speech. So the first problem with this bill is that it's unconstitutional in that these spending limits will not pass the voluntary test.
Mr. McClarty?
Well, that's just not the way this bill works. I think most Americans, Jim, certainly want the amount spent in each election to have some limit. Campaigns last too long. Money plays too much of a part. And
but what about the senator's point? You call them voluntary, but as a practical matter, they're not.
Well, no, a candidate just simply would not have some of the opportunity for the financing, which is paid for by not allowing the deductibility of lobbyists in terms of the way corporations account. So it's not the taxpayers' money. They have that choice if they do not want to receive it.
Ms. Miller, how do you feel about the voluntary spending limits proposal?
Well, I think the Supreme Court has also ruled, in fact, on this very question that Senator McConnell raises, saying that this would constitute a voluntary system, and I think the structure of this bill is constitutional. There are also Supreme Court guarantees that one person's speech cannot actually drown out the speech of others, which is the case now in which you have unlimited amounts of money to spend, and you look at the gaps between what incumbents have generally against challengers. So I think on the constitutionality question, this bill is quite solid.
Do you support it?
Generally, I think the bill has a number of problems.
No. Do you support it? I'm just talking about the voluntary spending limits part of that. Do you think that will correct the problem, and is it a good thing?
Well, I think the problems, voluntary spending limits are certainly a good thing. I think these limits are way too high, and in fact, really reflect what the average cost of a campaign was in the 1992 cycle, and really don't represent reform because they don't reduce or really even cap that spending. By the time you finish adding all the add-ons, particularly on the House side, you actually have spending limits at $825,000 or $850,000, not $600,000. I think that's a major problem in the bill.
Mr. Wertheimer, this is not reform?
No, it's reform, and it's broad reform. And I believe the president is to be applauded, I think, in providing the country strong leadership. Spending...
excuse me, Mr. Wertheimer, your mic is falling off. Great moments on television, you were there. There we go. That's all right, keep that, that's all right. Just hold it like that, that's fine.
You have to look at the spending limits in terms of the purpose. They're to stop the arms race that exists and that is being fueled by special interest money. And secondly, if they're reasonable, they will help challengers. Now, Ellen Miller talked about the spending limits in the House race, and we would like to see those somewhat lower. If you look at the spending limits in the Senate races, if you would have applied them to 1992, they would have cut 1/3 of the spending by incumbents, almost $40 million. They would not have cut more than $1 million from challengers. They would have helped create a much fairer system in Congress.
You just don't agree with that, Senator?
Well, first, they never work. They don't work in the presidential system. If you can envision putting a rock on Jell-O, Jim, that's what spending limits are.
Rock on Jell-O?
Yeah, it just sort of pushes the money out to the side in the undisclosed and unlimited channels. So you can be assured that even if these spending limits were constitutional, which they aren't, they wouldn't work.
They wouldn't work. Okay, Mr. McClarty, restrictions on the role of PACs and the lobbyists, how will this restrict those people and those actions?
Well, Jim, very clearly in both the Senate and the House proposals, there will be a 25% limit of PAC contributions in the overall context of a campaign. In the House, 1/3. So it clearly limits the amount of money that can be raised from political action committees.
So if a candidate raises $10,000, only if it's a Senate candidate, only $2,500 can be from PACs, and that has to be monitored all the way. I mean, is that at the final gun? It has to be that. Is that right? Is that right?
An aggregate amount. That's correct.
Senator, what do you think of that idea?
I think the president should have gone along with eliminating PACs altogether. That might have raised a constitutional problem, but I think the way it came out was particularly absurd. If one of the reasons for this bill is to diminish some kind of pernicious influence on Congress, why would it be okay for a PAC to give $5,000 to a House candidate, but only $2,500 to a Senate candidate, and only $1,000 to a presidential candidate? Obviously, this was cobbled together in order to allow the Democratic majority to continue to depend on PACs to the extent that they had in the past. And the House is much more PAC dependent than the Senate.
Is he right about that?
No, he's really not right about that. This clearly limits the amount of contributions from political action committee, and I think what Senator McConnell has suggested is just not.
But the fact is, why did you keep it higher for House candidates than for Senate candidates and for presidential candidates?
Well, Jim, each of the districts in the House are quite different. The way those candidates seek office are quite different. And I think, again, the basic reform here of limiting the amount per elections, limiting the amount for political action groups is very clear.
Mr. Wertheimer, how do you feel about this proposal?
Well, we would like to see the House PAC limit lower. We do not think it should be higher than the Senate. But the bigger way you control PAC money in these campaigns is through an aggregate limit, limiting the total amount a member of Congress or a candidate could accept. Once again, if I take the Senate limits and the 20% aggregate limit and apply it to the 1992 elections on incumbents, they would have lost 2/3 of their PAC money. So while these limits in some areas are higher than we would like to see them, they do take substantial amounts of PAC money out of the system.
It would have an impact. You agree, Ms. Miller, it would have an impact?
It'll have an impact really only around the margins. The way I spun the numbers this afternoon, Fred, what I saw in reducing an individual PAC contribution from $5,000 to $2,500 would in fact only remove about 13% of the money raised in the last election from the Senate cycle. On the House side, I think sort of setting the aggregate limit at 1/3 looks pretty good, but when you realize that another 1/3 of that is going to be large individual contributions, which we think is very much part of the special interest problem. In fact, what you've done is lock into place that 2/3 of the money comes from big money sources, and you have a similar problem on the House side. PACs have long been this sort of the one thing we've held up and said, this is what special interest giving is all about. But in fact, we know that in fact, the large individual contributors weigh every bit as much on the minds of members of Congress as do the PACs. And so I think this proposal really misses that boat substantially. And in fact, life for candidates won't be very different. They will still be raising huge amounts of money from special interest contributors.
Do you agree with that, Senator?
Just a quick addendum on the PAC issue. Republicans would have taken PAC contributions to zero, none. That's the special interest money. And that's the first reform test that it seems to me the president's package clearly fails.
Ms. Miller says that special interest can become an individual form as well as PAC form. Do you not agree with that?
Well, I suppose that's possible. I don't know how you can keep everybody from contributing.
Can I make a point here?
Sure.
Two things. First of all, Ellen Miller pointed to just the individual cut on the Senate side and came up with a 13% cut, but she left out the aggregate PAC limit. When you apply that, 2/3 of the money of incumbents would have been gone from the election last time. We have to look, I know we're trying to do this piece by piece, but you have to look at the overall impact. So at some point we'll do that.
We're going to get there.
But this bill does take PAC money out of the system very dramatically on the Senate side. The House side, we would like to see significantly more PAC money taken out of the system, but you also have to look at the other pieces to find out what you wind up with. You have to look at this as a whole, which we'll get to, I'm sure.
Sure. Let's talk about the soft or indirect money contributions. Mr. McClarty, how do you calculate what your restrictions would do there?
Well, basically, this proposal would eliminate soft money, corporate contributions, sometimes very large amounts, to both political parties.
And we probably ought to explain a little more about what soft money is. That is money that if somebody wants to give to Senator McConnell, but they want to get around the restrictions on amount of money, they can give it to, say, the Republican Party of Kentucky or the National Republican Party, and conceivably could come that way, not to you directly, but to both the Republicans in Kentucky, and that's essentially what soft money is, right?
Not entirely. No. There are two kinds of soft money. There is party soft money, and you described that kind of contribution. There's also non-party soft money. That person seeking to help a candidate
who favors a position that you have
to contribute to the AFL-CIO, which in turn would do work on behalf of the candidate that person supported, or might have contributed to a state party state account for doing work in the same general election that might apply. It's important to remember there are two kinds of party soft money. Democrats benefit mostly from non-party soft money. The president's bill does not a thing about non-party soft money. Nothing.
Only about party. Why did you do that, Mr.
Well,
McClarty?
I think, again, we're not going to go so far as to try to interfere with either a labor union or a corporation in terms of their activities, but I think, Jim, anyone would agree that eliminating soft money from political parties is a very meaningful and real step in campaign reform.
You don't agree?
Not if you leave this.
Not everybody agrees.
Not if you leave this gaping loophole.
Well, I don't think you fully agree.
You can weaken. Mac will surely agree. You can weaken parties or turn party soft money into hard money, but the money will then just go through the non-party route through tax-exempt organizations working on behalf of candidates of their choice. And the reality, Jim, is that most groups in the tax-exempt status working for candidates are working for Democrats.
Mac doesn't fully agree, Mitch. I think this will clearly reduce the amount of soft money in the political system.
Ms. Miller, do you agree that this will reduce the amount of soft money in the political system?
Well, there's no question that this is the strongest proposal we have seen to date, and the administration and all who have worked to put this together should be applauded for it. But this, as in all the other provisions we're talking about, the devil is really in the details. And we know enough to look for unintended consequences, and I think we need to go through this when the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed to make sure that this really does eliminate the ability of individuals to ply their influence by the gifts of $100,000 contributors. I think we need to look at this, but it certainly looks like it's in the right direction and quite strong.
Mr. Wertheimer, picking up on that point, the devil's in the details, et cetera, let's go to your general point. To look at there are other details that we could cover, but we'd be here all night. Just in general terms, is the president on the right track? Is the president and Mr. McClarty, are they on the right track?
Absolutely. I think the president has opened the door to fundamental change. To tax special interest money, this soft money system brought $85 million into the election cycle in the last 2 years to the Republican and Democratic parties, corporate money, labor union money, wealthy individual contributions. The combination of overall spending limits and public campaign resources do three things. They create the opportunity for challengers to get far greater resources than they're getting today. They create the opportunity for any member of Congress who wants to move away from this special interest system and to do it another way, to look to small contributions, matching funds, vouchers. And they also relieve something, and here Senator McConnell has a very different point of view. They relieve the enormous amount of time spent in the United States Senate raising money and currying favor with wealthy individuals and special interests who have an awful lot of money to put into the system.
Senator McConnell.
Jim, thank you for the opportunity to respond. You have left out the most critical element of the President's plan, which is that it starts a new federal program for us, a new federal entitlement program for us, for our campaigns, at a time when the President of the United States is calling upon the American people to sign on to the largest tax increase in history, and has proposed what he says is a major deficit reduction plan to spread pain across our society. He wants us to set up a new taxpayer-funded program to pay for our political campaigns. That's the fundamental flaw in the President's proposal. You mentioned Ross Perot in the introduction. Ross Perot hasn't endorsed this reform, and he won't endorse a reform that starts a new federal taxpayer-funded program for politicians.
Is that your only objection? In other words,
no, I have plenty of objections to it, but I do think that it was important not to leave out. Fred likes to kind of shuffle over the taxpayer
one back
funding.
there. This new program is to be funded by repealing the tax deduction for lobbyists. We're making, wait a minute, Senator. We're making a choice here. Rather than subsidizing lobbyists, we'll use those resources to help clean up the political system and eliminate the extraordinary corrupt process that dominates this town. It's not perfect.
Senator? Let me suggest that eliminating the deductibility of lobbying expenses might be a good idea. Maybe we ought to spend that money on childhood vaccinations or AIDS research. It's still public money. What they would do is eliminate the deductibility of lobbying. That's still taxpayers' money. They would also raise the checkoff to $5. That's still taxpayers' money. When a taxpayer checks off, Jim, that money is not added to the tax bill. It's diverted from other federal programs. These are tax dollars no matter what you call it.
Senator, let me ask you this. This thing is now, you heard what Senator Boren said to Kwame Holman today, that it was only this thing only had a 50-50 chance of passing. Is that good news to you?
It certainly is good news.
Is this a big thing to defeat this?
Oh, yes, it would be a big thing to defeat it, to save the taxpayers of the United States from this kind of a burgeoning entitlement program. Jim, just to enforce the law with 535 additional races, the Federal Election Commission would soon be the size of the Veterans Administration, with federal employees crawling all over candidates, auditing these public funds, third-party candidates dipping into the till to fund their races. This would be a massive bureaucracy. We need to save the taxpayers from this.
Mr. McClarty, is what he is describing what you have in mind?
Take a respectful but very sharp exception to that, to quite the contrary. This is talking about, Jim, really what this election was all about, and that's fundamental change, to really change the way we do business in Washington and serve the people of this country. That's what this campaign reform bill is about. It's about limiting the amount of money that can be spent in elections. It's talking about opening elections up where they're more competitive and effectuating the kind of change that will prepare us to move toward the 21st century.
What about the Senator's main point here, that what it also does is create a huge bureaucracy to govern the election?
Oh, I think quite the contrary, and I think Fred's already spoken to it. The way this program would be funded is to eliminate the deductibility of corporate lobbyists, and the checkoff is a voluntary checkoff, and I think the people of this country are very... No, let me finish, please. I think the people of this country feel very strongly that they want the way this political system is working to change.
One tactical question, Senator. Is this such a big thing that you Republicans are going to filibuster?
That's certainly a possibility. I haven't lost hope that there will be 51 votes to defeat the bill. In any event, there will be many germane amendments offered. It will be an extensive debate so that the American people can have an opportunity to learn more about this complex field.
So if you have your way then, and at least because of your opposition to this, and if you prevail, there will be no campaign finance.
No, if I had my way, we would eliminate PACs entirely, not this half-hearted.
But I mean on the president's bill.
The president's bill should be defeated.
Mm-hmm. And we will. How do you count the votes, Mr. McClarty?
Well, I think first of all, change is never easy, Jim, and I think again the president's come forward with a bold and a comprehensive campaign reform proposal. It will be vigorously debated and discussed. We are in this fight to win it, and we'll do our very best to serve the people of this country in that way.
All right. Ms. Miller, gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you.
Still ahead on the NewsHour, analyzing the week's political weather for the Clinton administration. Now, Gergen and Shields with the politics of the last week and a look at the reorganization of the Clinton White House. It was a rough week for the president. It began with his admission that his administration was out of focus and that the White House staff needed to be better organized. The week ended with the administration still grappling with possible measures to be taken in Bosnia. This afternoon, President Clinton was questioned about these issues, among others, at a press conference on the South Lawn of the White House. He was asked whether Secretary of State Christopher had any success this week in convincing the European allies on a common approach in Bosnia.
There's been a lot of agreement on what should be done. There is still some disagreement around the edges about what the overall specific tactical steps should be, but I think that there is a lot more agreement than you think, and I think in the next few days you'll see a common approach emerging.
You're sure that however things go, you may soon be asking Congress for some sort of approval or authorization for further action in the Balkans. Have you thought, Secretary, what form you would want that to take and what it would be?
I have given some thought to it, but I'm going to be heavily guided there by the leadership, the bipartisan leadership in the Congress and people who care most about these issues. I think that, again, before I make a final decision on that, I'm very, very anxious to talk to Senators Nunn and Lugar and the other 4 senators who went across the region and all the way to Moscow in the last week. And obviously it's important that I have my report from Secretary Christopher, but I've given some thought to it. I think it depends in a large measure on the sense of the Congress about how we ought to proceed as well.
We have a poll out tonight that shows that your job approval rating has gone from 64 to 49% in the last 2 months, with particular erosion on the economy, which was what most people think you were elected to fix. Why do you think this has happened, and what specifically do you think you can do about that?
I think there are 2 reasons. One is that I've been forced to deal with a lot of other issues. Most voters in this country don't like it when you spend any time on foreign policy because of the economic problems of the country. Secondly, I think even though the voters overwhelmingly supported the job stimulus package, what they really want is for the gridlock to end. And thirdly, I think that there is an inevitable sense that, things people want things to happen immediately that don't happen immediately. And finally, I think that the stimulus got more publicity than the budget resolution. I think, for example, I bet not 5% of the American people know that we passed a budget which has record-breaking deficit reduction and a long-term investment plan, and it passed at the most rapid point of any budget in 17 years. I bet not 1 in 20 American voters knows that, because we did it, and success and the lack of discord is not as noteworthy as failure. So a multi-trillion-dollar budget resolution I'm not criticizing you, this is just part of the deal, got less play than a $16 billion stimulus failure. So I think that people only can vote on and express what they know. I think the other big problem is I haven't been out there as much as I should have been engaging the American people directly since February. I've been here doing huge, heavy lifting and long meetings on health care and the economy. That's what I've been working on, and I've been forced to deal with a lot of other issues. I think when the American people see that the program that I promised them on February 17th is still intact and on the boards and going forward, when they realize that we are going forward with health care and that is, notwithstanding what the perception is, taking the lion's share of my time and attention, and when I get back out there and engage them again on it, I think that those things will turn around. But you cannot operate this job by polls. I mean, anybody who thinks they can be president by polls is just, I didn't run the governor's office that way. I didn't run for the only thing that matters is the polls that come around on election day. Those are the things that matter, and you have to be willing to take on tough decisions. It takes a certain amount of time to do things, to make difficult decisions, and to work through them. And you can't carry on a totally continuous campaign. It's simply not possible.
With us now are Gergen and Shields. David Gergen is editor-at-large at U.S. News and World Report. He's in Minneapolis tonight. Mark Shields is a syndicated columnist, and joining them tonight are Washington writer Elizabeth Drew and Jody Powell, former press secretary to President Jimmy Carter. David, starting with you, you've just been listening to the discussion on campaign finance reform. Very briefly, Fred Wertheimer said the president had opened the door to fundamental change. Has he?
I think he has opened the door to fundamental change, and I think he's got a fairly good prospect of getting it passed. The bill is quite similar to the one that Democrats passed last year that President Bush opposed. But I must say, Jim, I think that the issues are very arcane. I think the public's going to have a hard time understanding it. One thing that I do think comes through loud and clear is on the Republican side, this is a bill that's supposed to even the playing field so that it's more competitive when you run against members of the House. I mean, it's passingly strange that Democrats, who are the incumbents, are in favor of it, and Republicans who supposedly want to find a way to level the playing field are against it. The Republicans, I think, are going to be able to make that argument, also the argument that Senator McConnell was making against public financing. I think they'll find some receptive audiences out around the country. So I think the country will probably be confused and a little divided about it as the Congress proceeds.
How do you see it, Mark? A pretty good effort or not enough?
I think it's a superb effort. I really think that Bill Clinton deserves enormous credit. Most people, once they win the White House, are convinced and persuaded that the system that produced them was divinely inspired, not to be tampered with, whether it's financing or primaries or whatever else. And Bill Clinton has fulfilled probably the most difficult promise politically to fulfill, that of tampering with the way campaigns are financed. Because you're dealing with incumbents, they're going to write the law. They're people who have profited under the existing system. Add to that, I couldn't disagree more with David about the Republicans. I think the Republicans are proving that stupidity is not a victimless crime. They have a chance now to, instead of being outspent, we have an incumbent finance system. They're going to, first of all, let the Democrats, who are not totally excited about the prospect of changing the way elections are financed, even though they're publicly committed to that premise, they're going to let them off the hook, not with a presidential veto, as there was last year when George Bush was there, but by the threat, as Senator McConnell said, of a Republican Senate filibuster, which, if anything, would give the Democrats the moral high ground and preserve the status quo. I can't believe they'll do that.
Gentlemen and Elizabeth, let's talk about the thing that every commentator worth his syndication fees has been talking about for the last 2 weeks. And that now Clinton himself, the president, and now reflected in the latest polls. Mark, how serious is this alleged loss of focus, this disarray, disorganization in the White House?
Well, it is serious. The president has acknowledged it. The president's confronted it. That means that the president has to do something about it. And I just come back to what I think is the central truth about all these reorganizations that I've lived through, and that is that every White House staff is inevitably a mirror reflection of the presidential candidate. The self-righteousness or indecisiveness of Jimmy Carter's White House did not come from Jody Powell or Hamilton Jordan. It began with Jimmy Carter. The paranoia of Richard Nixon's White House and the sloth of Ronald Reagan's White House began with both of those men. It did not come from the staff, and the lack of discipline, the inability to stick to a message, to stay on a disciplined, direct agenda, begins and ends with Bill Clinton. Whether he adds 3 more people to staff, changes 2 offices, combines 4 meetings, isn't going to make a whit of difference.
David, what are your reflections on it, and how seriously debilitating is it to this presidency?
Robin, I think the president was in some trouble about 3 weeks ago, and he's been plummeting since. I think he's now wounded. There's no question that Bill Clinton is a very gifted, innovative leader. He's bounced back in the past. But this is something that does now cast a shadow over his presidency. It's not only a lack of focus, it's not only a problem in the White House. There is a growing perception that I found around the country that he's too tax happy, that these people not only want to raise taxes for the budget plan, but they've got hefty taxes in mind for the health care plan. The country is not happy with that. And very importantly, now that he's down, something Mark said last week, the fellow who won the first 100 days was not Bill Clinton and it was not Bob Dole. It was Ross Perot. And Ross Perot is a rising force in American politics. We've just been out in the field this week with U.S. News, and I tell you, the surveys show he is very powerful. Right now, he is a definite threat to Bill Clinton's presidency.
Elizabeth, has this disorganization or disarray cast a shadow on the presidency?
Well, there's no question he has and has had a lot of problems. And of course, the terrible, in every sense, distraction of Bosnia has been a very bad thing, I think, for him, because he was elected to work on the economy, and he was elected to deal with domestic issues. He can't help it. It came up, and I think, there's nothing to do but feel sorry for him that happened. But there has been a certain floundering, but I think we can sort of overdo this and also overdo what they've decided to do by calling it a shakeup. I would call it more of a retooling, a kind of tightening. The president said he'd lost focus. I would question the wisdom of his talking about that. It's for us to say, and I talked some time ago here about overload. It's not that he's trying to do so many things. It lacks any thematicness. It lacked any, remember the word vision, of what he was trying to do as presidency. The meetings at the White House go on and on and on. The decisions get visited and revisited and revisited. And so they're trying to tighten the whole thing down. I think too much is being made of the addition of a second deputy chief of staff. There were supposed to be two, and at the last minute, one was not asked to join the staff just before the inauguration. And there probably should have been two all along to help divide the very large burdens in that office.
Jody Powell, are we making too much of this retooling, or whatever phrase you prefer?
Probably in one sense you are, but in a broader sense you're not. And let me say a word perhaps in defense of the indecisive, self-righteous Carter administration and whatever other names we decided to call the Clinton administration here in the past few days. We are talking about prioritization, and we are talking about overload. But I think the mistake we make is to focus that entirely upon the president and upon the executive branch. We talk about setting priorities as though that were some simple process in which you separate the wheat from the chaff, the important from the unimportant. That is not what we're talking about. We are talking about a very brutal process in which you look at 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 things that really need to be done, that should have been done 10 years ago, which if you don't do them are gonna hurt the country and hurt real individual people. And you have to say, because this political process, this system that we have created, although Lord knows nobody in their right mind would have created it, it happened, because it can only accommodate, like a small child, one or two small ideas at a time, we won't do the 5 or 6 or 7 other things that we need to do. That is a brutal process, and that is not the fault of this president or any other president. And when the Congress chimes in, it's like the child molester who says it's because his mother didn't breastfeed him. I mean, it's because it's never said that we don't want to do this because we don't have what it takes to face up to a tough issue. It's always, well, if he only understood us more, if he only spent more time with us, if they only consulted us more, if they only served call brand liquor at the White House, whatever. It's everything but the real answer. And when we talk about priorities, we ought to really be talking about why it is that this system can't do what the country needs done.
Do you agree with that, Mark?
I don't. I think that Bill Clinton would be well served by the counsel given to him on Election Day last November by Peter Hart. Peter Hart said at that point Bill Clinton ought to sit down.
He's a Democratic pollster.
Democratic pollster who has appeared on this show. And Peter Hart said Bill Clinton ought to sit down at that moment and write the 3 things that he wants to run for re-election on in 1996, to say to the American people, this is what I've accomplished. Bill Clinton's shortcomings thus far are ironically the flip side of his strengths. I mean, this is a man of great interest, of great intelligence, active intellect, enormously curious, something that has not characterized his 2 most recent predecessors in the White House. George Bush didn't have a domestic agenda. John Sununu, when he was chief of staff, wanted to send the Congress home. But I do want to say, when it comes to this reorganization business, Robin, David pointed that out several months ago. Bill Clinton was establishing a White House staff with himself at the center of a wheel, with all the spokes coming to him. It's quite contradictory of the staff with Reagan, which had worked with Reagan in a pyramid fashion, and Jim Baker right beneath him. It is a system that he's constructed that is almost determined to fatigue and exhaust the person in the middle, because every problem comes eventually and directly to him.
David, how well do you think he has retooled, to use Elizabeth's words?
Well, I see a number of signs that go far beyond the staff restructuring, Robin, that he he has gotten the message that he's out of focus and he wants to move in a different way. I thought it was very wise of him this week, for example, to postpone his health care plan for at least a month until sometime in June, until he can get more progress made on his economic plan. In other words, he wants to get back and focus on jobs and on the economic plan. I think that was very wise. I thought it was wise for him to scale back his immunization program away from essentially what would have been a new entitlement to actually focus the program on needy children and to limit the amount of spending. I think Elizabeth is absolutely right. The change in the staff, I think, is quite minor. But in a number of ways, it seems to me Bill Clinton is now trying to put him to get back on track. And as I say, I think he's very innovative, but he's got a tough road ahead. Robin, this country is not happy with him right now, not as happy as it would like to be. And there's been a dramatic change in his standing in the last few weeks. What essentially happened, Robin, I think he started out with a slim base of only 43% in the election, essentially because Ross Perot was in the race. He needed to build that base up to get himself some credibility in the economic issue, the issue on which elected him. And he hasn't done that because he got so far out of focus. By getting back on the economy, maybe he can rebuild his base, build his base up. Then he'll have the credibility to go on and have the momentum to deal with health care and these other issues.
How do you feel about the public reaction of him, Elizabeth, to him at the moment?
Well, there clearly has been a decline.
Let me add another piece to the question. How much of it, referring to what the president just said himself, is due to all the attention to the Republican victory on the stimulus bill?
Well, I don't know if it was so much a Republican victory as a real Clinton loss. It was a very important loss, a far more serious loss than the $16 billion would lead you to believe. And part of the problem, Robin, was timing. It was unfortunately the case that the Republican filibuster began just as the president was going off to two summits, one on owls and one on the future of the Soviet Union. And so people weren't around to sort of gather and decide what to do about it. Whether they solved it quickly or not, I don't know. Then there was a 10-day congressional recess. And this is symptomatic of some of the White House problems. They were back and forth, how much the president should campaign against it, or should he get so far out on it? Should he go against the Republicans who were filibustering that he might want to bring over? And he sort of did a little bit of everything. But they were the ones that kept it in the news for 10 days because he was fighting to get this bill passed, which he finally failed to do, which made it an even larger defeat.
David and Mark, starting with you, Mark, just a word on Bosnia. How do you think the president is handling that?
Well, I think this is really the lonely burden of the office. I think he's wrestling with an enormously painful problem because American principles are at stake here, not national interest. And I think it appears the president is coming to the conclusion, and for which I can only admire him, that if we act and fail, it would diminish us less as a people than to fail to act. But he has to get the Congress, he has to get the UN, and he has to persuade the American people. It's a tall order.
David, how's he handling it?
Well, Robin, there's no question that he thinks it's the toughest problem he's faced on the foreign policy front. As Mark says, he's got all those forces out there, the people, the Congress, the allies are all divided about it. But I must tell you, the longer this drags on, the more indecisive he appears. Even though he wants to do the right thing, he's not able to put his imprint on it. I think he now has to step forward and be decisive about this because there's a sense of drift about the way this country and the Europeans have been responding to the problem at hand. The more there's just talk and less action, the more people get killed over there. And the sense right now around the country is that, that the West is fiddling while Bosnia burns.
Jody, having been with a president who faced some similar problems, how do you feel this president is handling Bosnia?
What I feel is a great deal of sympathy. I feel a little bit about Bosnia the way I do about campaign finance reform. I would be inclined to call the Congress and say, look, this is your problem. You're the people that look terrible on this thing. You're the people that have threatened. Here are my ideas. Do them or don't do them, but let it be on your shoulders. My inclination would be to do the same thing with the Europeans on Bosnia and say, look, this is what we think ought to be done. If you're willing to step up and play, that's fine. If not, let it be on your shoulders. I think Dave is right that he does have to show some decision here. I'm not sure just to be decisive. We want to do something that's going to cost lives to no good end.
Elizabeth, briefly, how do you think he looks on Bosnia?
Well, I think that the period of waiting and delaying was for a real reason. He cannot possibly ask the United States to do things that the Allies won't do, and he's asking for things that need the United Nations approval. So he couldn't act unilaterally even if he wanted to. But right now, Robin, this is different from earlier issues, and this is not the Gulf War. He does not, as of now, have the votes in the Congress to approve this. The presidents rarely get turned down, and if he makes a very strong case, he'll get it. But you don't have the normal party divisions of people all over the lot, and a lot of people very confused as to whether this is a good idea.
Well, Elizabeth and gentlemen, thank you.
Again, the major stories of this Friday. President Clinton said the United States and its allies must turn up the heat on the Bosnia Serbs to make peace in Bosnia. He also announced a campaign financing bill aimed at reducing the influence of big money and special interests on federal elections. And the unemployment rate remained the same for 3 months in a row at 7%. Good night, Robin.
Good night, Jim. That's the News Hour for tonight. Have a nice week.